I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Good
Good
afternoon or good
afternoon or
evening,
good
ladies and
evening, ladies
gentlemen,
and
and
gentlemen, and
welcome to
welcome to
another
another
episode
episode
of
of
Education Matters
Education Matters
with Jim O'Connell. And we're here on the last day of, no, not the last day anymore. That was yesterday, right? Today is the 1st of August. I'll catch up in a second. The 1st of August, and we have a month left before school starts on, I think, September 5th. But the days just whiz on by. Much is happening in the body politic in Manchester, and especially regarding the candidacies for the upcoming elections. We're going to have we'll have a primary on September 19th, and there are some interesting primaries, none more interesting, I think, than the one in my own ward, Ward 2, where there are 5 candidates running for the alderman there. But first of all, I think it's important to state at the outset that we the people, everybody in the city, should be grateful to those who are generous enough to put their names forward. And sometimes when people like me are commenting on what has been decided or what people are deciding and how they might have decided differently, etc. I think it's always important that the background to it all should be that we appreciate those who run for public office, and then those who are elected and have the privilege to serve. It's not an easy task, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And we should be grateful to the people who did it, and I certainly am. Once again, I'm on the horns of a dilemma, because I don't want that respect that I have for both the office that the people hold, but for the actual individuals who hold the office as well, and respect the time they put in. I don't want it to stop me from being able to both praise them when they do something well, and to or make a decision that turns out to be very beneficial. But also, I think a part of running for office and accepting office is accepting that the public will comment on the decisions that you make, and you'll be asked to defend them and explain them. I think they're all big boys and girls and are able to do that. At least I hope they would be. And anybody who's running for public office who's not ready for the cut and thrust of politics, and by that I don't mean anything underhand. I mean just simply the vigorous debate of ideas, disagreement and agreement, and hoping to arrive at some solution. This is what I mean by the cut and thrust of politics. I noted that there were some, since we were last on here, we had the special election last week for Ward 16, for District 16, which included Wards 1 and 2, Ward 12, and then the towns of Hooksett, Bow, Dumbarton, and maybe Candia. Amazingly, and at the outset, let me say that I was thrilled that the candidate that I supported, Kevin Kavanagh from Ward 1, was the candidate that actually succeeded, and he not alone succeeded, but he got a pretty extraordinary high vote, and I think it's all the more remarkable given that he was running against former Senator Dave Booton, who himself is no slouch when it comes to, previously hadn't been, when it came to garnering votes and winning seats. And Dave Booton was a very competent candidate. I don't agree with Dave Booton when it comes to education in particular, but I do recognise again that he was a competent candidate. The Libertarian ended up getting 1%. So let me just turn this off. This is probably somebody trying to sell me some amazingly beneficial free thing from some other state. I get so annoyed by those phone calls, ladies and gentlemen. So the Libertarian candidate ended up with 1%. Kevin Kavanagh ended up with 55% and Dave Booton with 44%. So that was a big win. And the first, other than the race that was won by the recently deceased Scott McGilvery, who occupied the seat for perhaps a year, it was the first time that a Democrat had won that seat since, I think, the 70s. And that seat actually was held by the current mayor of Manchester, Mayor Ted Gatsas, when prior to he earlier in his career. So it was it was a good win, a strong win for Kevin Kavanagh. Kevin's a really nice person. He's a great guy. Wears his heart on his sleeve. There is no duplicity about him. You know where he stands. He's a strong supporter of public education. He believes that public employees should be properly compensated for their efforts, and he believes that the public schools should be adequately funded. And so it's not easy to see why I would be a supporter of Kevin's. And besides that, he's a nice guy anyway. So congratulations to Kevin. I have to say that when I was listening to a debate on the radio just the couple of days before the election, and I called into that program. It was on National Public Radio, and I was at pains to I wanted to understand where Mr. Booton stood on public education or on funding education generally, given the background that he had been part of the majority back a few years ago who voted to reduce the funding for the university system of New Hampshire by close to 50%, the largest cut ever made by anybody in any state of a public university system. We in New Hampshire have the honour of owning that. And Dave Booton had voted for it. We also, by the way, have the honour of having the students, New Hampshire students, university students, are the students with the highest amount of student debt of any students in the United States. And as we all know, student debt is an issue that is likely to be the next bubble, or possibly will be the next bubble, and it has now surpassed, student debt has surpassed credit card debt in the United States in terms of gross numbers. And I mean gross in both sense of the word. It's gross and it's huge. Let me just say, remind people that our call-in line is 640-3091, and again, I'm always happy to hear any of you what you would like to say, or any comments that you might have, whether they are in support or not, or how you feel about things. Please feel free to call in. Again, 640-3091, and I'd be happy to have you on air and hear what you have to say. So I did during that call. I talked to. There are no games here, right? I don't understand what it is that somebody like Dave Booton, who's running for the Senate, what he obviously understands the problem, or you'd imagine he does. And so what is his answer? He wanted to represent wards 1, 2, and 12. So what is his answer for education in the state of New Hampshire? In particular, my question to him on that occasion was, are you going to go up to Concord, and are you going to support Manchester Public Schools, the largest school system in the state? And his response amazed me, and I know I don't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak, because the election is over and Kevin Kavanagh did win, but it goes to the core of the people who are running for public office, and the difference between those who understand that education is key for the future of our state and of our city and of our society, and those who simply don't value it at all. And Mr. Booton's response to the question was he wanted to talk about Manchester Community College and a program that he, and as I understand it, he may have almost done it single-handedly or put a lot of work into it. But it seemed to me that he was responsible for this program. That was going to be small engine repair program that is going to go on at MCC, and anybody that contributes anything deserves credit, so credit to him for that. I think any program you can have sponsored that adds to the opportunity for young people in our state, great. But the glaring problem with this, though, was I don't have any question in my mind but that we have a need for all kinds of education in our state. But if your answer to the young people of the state of New Hampshire is we're going to do small engine repair, I don't think that gets us to the 21st century. We've got a caller here. Let's see what they have to say. I think we might have missed. Oh, we got him. Hi, caller. Are you there? Sorry. We might have lost them. So call again. Call in again, caller. I'm sorry, I might have hit the wrong button here with my fat fingers. So please feel free to call again. But here's the answer. You know, in the face of talking about we've got the least well-funded school system, et cetera, and the problems we have in Manchester, the person who wanted to represent a quarter of the city was going to go up to Concord, and his response to you, the people of Manchester, was that, I've sponsored a program at Manchester Community College doing small engine repair, and I have to tell you. I think there's obviously a place in our society for tradespeople, for general labourers, for bus drivers, for line cooks, for people bussing tables, for skilled trades, etc. I think it takes all of the above. Here's our caller again. Good afternoon, caller. Go ahead.
Yes. Like your show, and I wanted to get your thoughts on Joyce Craig. I'm not quite sure about her stand on school and school politics and her direction.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the call. Thank you. All right, so Joyce Craig. So first of all, I supported Joyce the last time out, and I like Joyce Craig. I think I like the fact that she has children in the school system and is committed to it. I have to tell you that I have not at this point looked at her literature line by line as to what her stance is on various things. But I know from talking to her and from knowing her the last time, she believes that a public education and a well-funded and properly funded public education is essential to the city of Manchester. I can also tell you this, that I don't expect that if Joyce Craig were elected mayor tomorrow, or on November 7th, I don't expect that things will suddenly change, and that the mere fact that Joyce Craig is one of the 29 people in public office in this city will mean that all problems will suddenly start to disappear in our schools. I think the biggest thing, to answer your question most directly, I think the biggest thing that I see in Joyce Craig is that, first of all, she recognizes the problem. It's taken 10 years for Mayor Gatsas to shift away from simply saying everything's perfect over here, everything's fine, there are no problems. Anybody who says there are problems in our schools is some unpatriotic, anti-Manchester, uninformed person. And so you can't fix a problem when you refuse to recognize it. So that's the first thing that will happen. Without Mayor Gatsas in the corner office, we'll be able to have reasonable conversations about what the issues are and how we might move forward. And what I expect from Joyce Craig when she's in the corner office is, first of all, I expect her to stop and not shout people down who don't agree with her views. I can't see Joyce Craig every time some alderman or school board member opens their mouth at the school board that they get shouted down if she doesn't like what they're saying. And when people like whoever it might be, when we were doing the strategic planning 4 years ago, there was a strategic planning committee, and there was a gentleman from Southern New Hampshire University who very generously offered to give his time to assist with that exercise, So and came before the school board, and he was attacked by Mayor Gatsis, and then he was gone because Mayor Gatsis wasn't interested in hearing what this man, who actually knew something about strategic planning and had qualifications in that regard and could have helped our city, but because he wasn't the Gatsis guy, he got run out of the room. And that happened too many times. And I don't like to make it about Mayor Gatsis all the time, but in the end, part of the reason why we're in the mess we're in the city of Manchester generally, and in the schools in particular, is because Mayor Gatsis has played fast and loose with our schools over the last 8 years. Because politically, he doesn't have a solution for the problem, and therefore he spends 6 to 7 years denying there was any problem existing. And then in the last year or so has come around to at least saying that, we need to take action around the redistricting and some other stuff. I'm not saying he wasn't in favour of I don't want to be misunderstood that I'm saying he wasn't in favour of redistricting before. I'm saying that his stance previously had always been, don't look here, everything's fine, look at the great job we're doing, we've got great schools, and that's where he stood. And so I expect under Joyce Craig that attitude will change, and that will be the single biggest difference. We have another caller, just a second. Go ahead, caller, and welcome. Who's calling?
Yeah, this is Roland.
Hi, Roland. How are you?
It's not Mayor Gatsis' fault the way things are going today. I'll tell you whose fault it is. It's those guys who are aldermen. They're supposed to be representing the people of Manchester. But as far as I'm concerned, they represent the unions. And all they do is they're spending Manchester with money that we don't even have. They spend. And we don't even have it. So there's your problem right there.
Okay.
Is that the aldermen, I'd be so glad when we can get we have to clean the swamp.
Can I ask you, Roland? Could I ask you a question,
Anyway,
Roland?
like I told you, it's the alderman's fault, not Mayor Gatsis. Because all the aldermen want to do, especially the Democrats, all they want to do is spend.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Can I ask?
Give you $100 million, and
Yeah.
I still think you wouldn't be happy.
Right.
With the schools.
Could I ask you a question?
And I want to thank you very much.
Could I ask you a question? So, all right. I guess not. Roland, thank you. I was attempting to have a conversation with you because I wanted to ask you something, but since you said that all they want to do, what did you say? They want to spend, and if we gave you $100 million, you wouldn't be happy. I think you said. I'm not sure. I lost track of that, but I heard what you had to say. That it's not Mayor Gatsis' fault that our schools are in the problems that they have. If I'm not putting words in your mouth, it's not Mayor Gatsis' fault our schools have the difficulties that they have, and that it's really the alderman's fault, and that all they want to do is spend, and they spend, and they're spending money we don't have. I think that's what I heard you say. Now, with all due respect, let me just demonstrate to you why you're wrong. And don't pull your hair out at home or get excited or get mad. We can disagree. That's fine. But I'm just telling you you're wrong. And I'll tell you why I think you're wrong. Because there's no evidence of spend. That's the first thing. So you should go and actually look up some numbers and come back and say to me, where are the numbers? When it comes to our school system, we increased our school spending last year. Under Mayor Gatsis, it would have been 165. It ended up being 167. Level funding for our schools last year would have been $170 million. That's what it would have been to retain the programs and teachers that we had on the 1st of June. To have those still on the 1st of September, we needed $170 million. And we're not getting $170 million. We have the largest, this is just very easy to understand and very black and white. We have the largest number of students per teacher of any school district of the 100 and something school districts in the state of New Hampshire. We are at the very, very bottom on our own with the largest number of kids in our classes. And despite that, and despite all the talk about redistricting and all the other things, and I'm not saying I don't agree with that, or talking about declining populations, we can. That's all fluff. We can talk about it. When you tear all the smoke away, the answer is the school district in the state of New Hampshire that has the largest number of children in its classes per teacher is the city of Manchester. That's just a fact. And you can look it up on the State Board of Education website if you want, and the school numbers for every single school district in the state are printed right on there. I think the most recent numbers are 2015-16. So they're right on there. And we're at the very bottom. And so now you would imagine that when you are spending less on your public education than every other school district is in the state in terms of per capita spending, and when you have more kids in classrooms per teacher than every other town in the state. You would say, you want to, despite those facts, you want to come on here and say you think that there's a bunch of spendthrift aldermen and school board members that are voting to spend. The evidence is that every other school district in the state of New Hampshire spends more. And oh, by the way, while you're thinking about that, I know it doesn't meet your political ideology and opinion, and I respect that, because I think all people's opinions are fine. Opinions are fine. You might still hold the same opinion after having listened to me if you are listening to me. That's fine, but you're just whistling past the graveyard and denying facts, because facts are facts. So the answer to the idea that our aldermen are a bunch of spenders when it comes to education is simply not true, because our schools don't have the things that they need in order to be successful. So that's just very plain, and it's been going down over time. I have to tell you something, that if you think that this bunch of aldermen and school board members that we've had over the last, say, 4 or 5 administrations, Ted Gatzis isn't going back into Frank Gintis, if they actually were the spend people that you think they are, then we wouldn't be the cheapest school system in the state of New Hampshire. And we wouldn't have had 42 kids in a math classroom at Hillside Middle School. And last year, I wouldn't have had a daughter at Central High School in her junior year with 32 kids in her math class, and my son wouldn't have been in his freshman year with 32 kids in his class. And those are facts, sir, with all due respects. And the state of New Hampshire says there should be no classroom anywhere in the state that has more than 24 kids in a math class. None. That it is dysfunctional once you get to 24. Now, basic math, because I did math in the old world, basic math will tell you that 32 is 1/3 times bigger than 24. So in the city of Manchester, we have 33% more kids in math classes in some of our schools than is the maximum allowed by state. And you yet still persist in your opinion that we're spend with no evidence of any spend. This current year, we're giving some money back to taxpayers in the city of Manchester. Last year, we gave money back to taxpayers in the city of Manchester. And we're doing that while removing teachers in a school system that has the greatest number of kids per classroom. So I'm sorry if I sound a little fired up, but I would like you to produce some numbers and show me what you actually mean, rather than political rhetoric and comments that are, I accept them, and I thank you for calling in, and I do appreciate it. And, I want to be polite, because not artificially polite. I'm not, it's not like, I want to talk down to people or anything. I'm just fighting for my viewpoint, and you're right to fight for yours, and I think it's good you call in, and I welcome that, to be clear. But I just simply vehemently disagree with you, because I look at the same data as you do, and the data tells me something entirely different. The fact is, in the city of Manchester, that the 29 public representatives in our city, 14 board mayor, 14 aldermen, 14 school board members, and a mayor. Those 29 people between them, and you can divide the blame any way you want across them, because they're all to blame, maybe not equally, but they're all to blame. They all carry the can for it. In their great wisdom, despite the fact that we had the least well-funded school system in the state and the largest number of kids per classroom in the state, the answer from the city of Manchester is there will be a net 14 less teachers in Manchester schools at the 1st of September than there was at the end of June. And that's undeniable. And that's indefensible. And I would think you should, if I were a taxpayer, I am a taxpayer in Manchester. As a taxpayer in Manchester, I think taxpayers should be angry about a lot of things. And they should be angry that their beautiful city is being derided locally, regionally, and across the New England states from people who want to move here, because it is known as a city that doesn't value its education, and I see evidence of it every day of the week that people don't want to move here for that reason. And I challenge you, sir, to go out. There are in Keller Williams' real estate office in Bedford, amazingly, there are almost 300 realtors just in that one office. So there's a realtor on every second street corner in Manchester, and they come in all shapes and sizes and all political views and slants of all kinds. And I guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee it, but I'm pretty well sure that you couldn't find one single realtor from the thousands of real estate professionals in Manchester. Pick the most archly conservative one you can find. You can't find one of them that will say to you that it is untrue that families don't want to move to Manchester because they don't like the school system. Because everybody knows that it's true. So again, if your perception were correct, then we wouldn't. This problem wouldn't be occurring. What taxpayers should be mad about is why don't we have the school system that we deserve? Why don't we resource our school system in the way that it should be resourced? Why is it that we have kids in buildings? We had a building last year where it turned out that there was sewerage flowing into an elementary school classroom closet, and it had been going on for 4 years, on and off. Fixed, broke again, fixed, broke again, fixed, broke again. So that's the system that you're saying is, they just want to spend. You're just simply wrong, sir. That's in my worldview. And again, thank you for calling in. I go back to, I was talking before we get into this, I was talking about with Mr. Booten, and as I said, I saw Mr. Booten as a formidable candidate, and he had proven himself to be one, and on many issues, he had led in the state of New Hampshire, and I don't think Dave Booten is some far right-wing ideologue or something, or I think he's a regular guy, and that's why I think he was a really good candidate, because I think he's capable. He showed himself to be a capable politician and capable to lead, etc. On the area of education, once again, he and I fall apart. But the problem is for these folks who do not want to go back to you, the taxpayer, and explain to you why we need to resource our schools properly. They're stuck. They're stuck with nothing to say, so they have to come out with these ridiculous, and what are at their face ridiculous arguments around the answer is, two-stroke engine repair or small engine repair. And I can't even believe that in the fifth, sixth, or seventh richest state in the United States in terms of per head of population income, we have the lowest unemployment of any state in the United States of America. So one of the richest states, practically zero unemployment in our state, and at the same time, we have American corporations who have more money on hand today than they've ever had at any time historically. This idea that Manchester's too poor to do anything other than it will accept its position at the bottom of the ladder is appalling to me. And I think that the generations gone before you and me, Roland, I think those people looking at us now would be appalled that that's where we've gotten to, and that despite the fact that we're one of the richest states, despite the fact that we have 0 or 2.1% unemployment, despite the fact that the economy is booming, at this moment, the people of Manchester and the leaders of Manchester still want to cry, we're not going to spend a dime, we're going to hold the line. And if you're really a fiscal conservative, by the way, sir, or anybody else, the right thing to do, this is just sweating the asset. This is like inheriting an apartment building somewhere in Manchester from your dad in 1980 or 90, a 6-unit, building somewhere. And you take great pride in the fact that you won't spend a dime, and you haven't spent a dime. And now it's the least nice property on the street, and it has single glazed glass on the windows instead of double glazed, and it leaks heat, so it's not very economical, so you have to pour oil into it to keep the heating there. That people don't want to stay in your apartment building anymore, which your dad was once proud of and had shiny brass on the door, and people came and wanted to live in that apartment building because it was the nicest one on the street, the best kept one on the street, the best managed one on the street, and everybody knew that your dad's property was the one. Boy, I'd love to live in that house. And you have turned around in your 30 or 40 years, and you've taken that building, and you still want to march up and down the street, pounding your chest, telling people, I promise you I won't spend a dime on that. Oh, but sir, the landscaping hasn't been done in 5 years. I know, I'm not going to spend a dime on that. That's what we have in Manchester. We have 200-year-old schools that we refuse to fund properly. We won't. I've talked about our school system before in our 22 schools. The last time we built a new school was 1992. Just some basic math for you again. The last time we built a new school was 1992. In order, so if our schools aren't to keep on aging, so that 50 years from now they'll be 250 to 300 years old, at some point, some generation will have to start, managing this property portfolio properly. We last built a school in 1992. In order to have our schools 100 years old, right, 22 schools, if we wanted to replace all 22 schools over a 200-year period, just bear with the math here a minute, 22 schools, if we replaced them if we had a plan now to have them all replaced by the next 200 years, so the last of them would be nearly 400 years old perhaps, we'd need to build a new school every 8 years. That's what we should be doing as responsible, fiscally conservative, properly managing an asset people who take their obligations to the assets that they own properly. That's what we should be doing. If we wanted to make sure that our schools were replaced over the next 100 years, we should be building a new school every 4 years. Well, under the 4-year scenario, 1992, 2002, 2012, 25 years, 4 to 25, 6 times. We're 6 schools behind since 1992. Under the one every 8 years, we're 3 schools behind since 1992. And I'm not saying that I have a reason today for saying we should go out and build a new school somewhere just for the sake of building it. I'm putting some ideas and thoughts out there that people other than those who keep saying, we're managing we refuse to spend a dime, we're holding a line, we can't afford it. It's all nonsense. It's all smoke, misery. It doesn't bear scrutiny. And it's not this city would never be what it is today if such small-minded people had been mayors of our city for the last 200 years or 150 years. We'd be sitting out at Grenier Field, would be still a grass field with a strip down the middle of it, and there'd be a guy sitting in a wooden hut with a flag, and there'd be a couple of biplanes coming in there twice a week with some people jumping in and out of it. That's what would be out at Grenier Field if the kind of politicians that we have in Manchester today were around 30 and 40 years ago, because they're small-minded, cheap, not very expansive in their thinking people. I don't want to be too derogatory, but maybe not cheap, might be too harsh on them, but you know what I'm saying. These people are never going to turn around and give you can you imagine with the current set of taxpayers in Manchester and without they being led or people explaining to them what is necessary to happen here, what would we, how would you ever have had a canal built in Manchester and the greatest manufacturing centre that the world had known, perhaps the biggest in the world at that time, with a major manufacturing centre in the northeast of the United States, the growing United States of America? Who would have said when the guy stood up at a meeting and said, I think we should harness the river. I think we should build canals so we can move product up and down the river and ship it down the Merrimack and out to the ocean to go all across and around the world. Products that we're going to sell everywhere in wooden ships. He would have been laughed out of a room because the small-minded people with their we don't want to spend a dime would be laughing and joking about, he wants to build a canal. So I only want people in Manchester to live up to their forefathers, live up to what went before them, grow themselves some ambition, stick their heads up out of the sand and say we will not accept a situation where the whole world looks at us and looks at data and sees that we've got the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire. We've got the most crowded classrooms of any city in the state of New Hampshire. We spend less than everybody else. That is simply appalling and is not acceptable to me. And we can talk all day and people can go on all day. It won't change those facts. For instance, I strongly support redistricting. If you were watching last week, I was my good friend Ross Terrio was here, and Ross and I don't agree on. We're sort of come from things philosophically differently politically, but we managed to find things that we can discuss and talk about and that we can agree upon. The solutions we might not agree upon, but at least we don't argue about the set of facts that we have before us. So it seems to me that people looking at the situation that we have would find it easier to arrive at a common understanding than we have. The redistricting issue, as I pointed out last week, if you were watching, I'm all for redistricting. I think it's going to be difficult. I think it should be done, despite how difficult it is. We should just do it, and it will have large benefits because it will allow a more even distribution of resources across the system, and there will be less disparity in experience between one school and another, so that all kids are treated equally in our city. I think that will be an important benefit of that, and it will be more rational, and it should save us. It should also save us costs, because we'll be able to better distribute the resources that we have. So they're all good reasons for doing redistricting, and I'm all for it. But after we've done that, let's be very clear that when you take the total number of students in the city of Manchester that is there today, and the total number of teachers, and you divide the number of teachers into the number of students, and you get the bottom right-hand corner answer that says that we've got the largest number of kids per teacher of any city in the state, or any town or school district in the state of New Hampshire, moving all the kids around, which I support, if necessary, moving your kids around and redistricting everything will bring synergies and will certainly be a help, and will help on our budgeting even. But it will do absolutely zero, not even 0.0000 to infinity, 1% difference to that bottom right-hand number. After all the redistricting is done, there'll be exactly the same number of students and the same number of teachers as there was before you started redistricting. So while I support it, it's another example of a place where we certainly should be spending time, but it's not going to alter the big picture. Because the big picture, we need to do something about, as taxpayers in Manchester, we need to do something about the model that has the state of New Hampshire shifting costs down to us. It makes no sense cities and municipalities across the state are suffering the same problem, because we voted a bunch of people into Concord who want to balance the budget. And they want to balance the budget in Concord however they do it, because they too want to be like Ted Gatsas or others when they run for office. They want to go up to Concord and run for office and tell you, the voters, we won't spend it, we're going to hold the line on the budget. Vote for me, I'm going to hold the line. Well, say thank you very much, sir, because they're holding the line for you. And because they're holding the line up in Concord, your taxes are going up here in Manchester. Because they're down. The fact is, they can't balance the budget in Concord without downshifting costs down to the cities and states, cities and towns. And especially they can't do that when they're giving money to their buddies and reducing income on the state budget side while passing costs down to you. So you're paying more because of the people that we're electing into office in Concord. And that's why during the last special election just a few weeks ago, when Kevin Kavanagh was running against Dave Booton, that I was anxious to find out from Mr. Booton, was he going to support Manchester's taxpayers and Manchester schools or not when he got to Concord? Because previously he had not. And he got a little upset when challenged on it, and went on about his two-stroke engine repair, and that somehow, we have 14,500 students, or 14,100, or whatever the latest number is, in the city of Manchester, with all kinds of dreams and aspirations, and they're the future generation that are going to keep you and I and everybody else in whatever comfort or lack of comfort we're going to be in the years to come. And anybody who stands up and is asked a reasonable question about will they support the schools in Manchester or not, and they come back with an answer talking about two-stroke engines and how your kids and mine are going to learn how to repair lawnmowers, then they should be disqualified as being a non-serious person, a non-serious candidate. And frankly, in the case of Mr. Booton, I respect his intelligence and ability, and I don't believe for a minute that would be his answer if he had any place else to go. But the only other place he has to go is to either go up to Concord and say we need to raise revenues in Concord, or to come down here and say we need to raise revenue here. But he's stuck between a stone and a hard place, because that is the answer. After years of downsizing and downsizing and downsizing and stripping the asset. Let me just jump to a place. I don't usually go outside education, but there's something that happened in the last week in Concord, which is illustrative of, the political games that we play. So So the state of New Hampshire found itself with $30 million more than it needed in its coffers. And so it took the $30 million and decided to give it back to cities and towns in order to work on bridges and infrastructure, bridges and roads in their towns. Now, at first flush, that sounds very reasonable. And you would say, well, isn't this a good thing? This is good, right? So they're going to give money back. And the city of Manchester, by the way, got $3.7 million. Not a small amount of money. I mean, it's at its face, that's a good thing. I think I heard Mayor Gatsis say that we're going to, there's a problem with Amoskeag Bridge and some of our other bridges, but particularly Amoskeag Bridge, and it will help us to do the repairs there. So you would say, well, what's the problem with that? That's a good thing. Well, I have several problems with it, actually, because to me it's political. It's playing political games, pandering to the public, pandering to the electorate, trying to create narratives for your next election. That's what it is. And then secondly, it is fiscally and economically irresponsible, because more than half the bridges in the state of New Hampshire are in serious need of repair. Some of them are in critical need of repair, and some of them are closed. You can look at a list of red lined or red letter bridges is on the state of New Hampshire's website, and you can look at it. But we have a multi-billion and billion dollar problem in the state of New Hampshire with our roads and infrastructure that needs to be repaired. And the state of New Hampshire's answer, of course, is to do like what they're doing on I-93. Spend from the 1970s onward, or the 1980s, arguing and talking about about the expansion of I-93, and eventually get around to it by piecemealing it out over 20 years. And drag out a construction over another 20 years. So eventually we get to an answer with the widening of I-93. As some of you may know, Route 101 through the Bedford area and out into Amherst, that road is maxing out in its capacity, and there is a significant problem with it, and it is and will continue and will grow in the limiting factor it will have on expansion of our state population westwards out towards Peterborough, and in particular on the growth of the towns of Bedford, Amherst and Milford, because that road is becoming more and more congested. Now, many years ago, there is a plan in the state to fund the expansion of 101 to the west of Manchester. That plan isn't even in the 10-year forward-looking plan today. Can't make it in. I mean, it's necessary now. But it's not, because the state of New Hampshire has no money to do it. And of course, our bridges, some towns in the state of New Hampshire have bridges that are closed, and so there's no access, and people have to take drive-arounds to get to other parts, particularly in the North Country, because we don't have the money for our red line bridges. And then we have significant structural or there's a word for it I've forgotten. There's a word for bridges that have a structural deficit. In other words, single factor bridges. In other words, they're saying if there were one factor, one element of the structure were to fail, that it would undermine the entire bridge. And we see this is, I think, the 10th anniversary this week of the collapse of the I-30 Interstate 35 bridge in Minnesota. Where people were killed when a major highway bridge fell into the river. So back to the issue of the $30 million. So we need every penny of that $30 million for the State Department of Transport to just, it isn't even a postage stamp, to begin to ameliorate some of the problems with our state infrastructure. The real thing is that some men and women of fortitude and foresight and bravery and intellect should be sitting around the tables in Concord and deciding how we as a people, as a state, finance the repair of our crumbling infrastructure in the state. That's something shouldn't be pushed down the road for the next 10 years and be left to another administration. It should be done today. But we have no such ambition in the state of New Hampshire. Governor Chris Sununu finds it politically expedient And of course, it's got a certain charm to it because you'll be able to print nice brochures about it in 18 months when you're running for your second term, to say that, oh, we gave funds to local municipalities in order to repair their infrastructure. So you take $30 million, which in the great scale of things is a very small amount when it comes to infrastructure. You please a lot of people at the local level. I think Hearts Location got $1,200 or $1,500. So the people of Hearts Location, everybody got a little something. People are able to say, we did something about infrastructure, which you actually didn't at all, right? This is like having the grass in your house hasn't been cut in 5 years and it's all 8 foot tall and you can't get in the front door, and you go over and grab 2 handfuls of it and pull it out and say, oh, look, we're working on the problem. And oh, by the way, can you take a photograph of me while I'm pulling out the weeds? So when I run for office, I can tell people, look, this is me, Chris Sununu, pulling weeds. Oh, yes, I did pull weeds. Oh, but your house is covered. Yeah, but I pulled those ones, didn't I? Yeah, you gave $30 million back to the municipalities. Heart Location got their $1,400, and Manchester, which has major infrastructure needs, got $3.7 million, which we are grateful for, I know. But in the end, this is politics, not practicality. And as people who are fiscally conservative and economically conservative who want their dollars properly spent should see this nonsense for what it is, the game for what it is. In order to get that $30 million, we have a dysfunctional youth detention system. We have a women's prison that can't be open because we don't have staff in it. We have a huge deficit in prison officers in the state of New Hampshire because we can't employ enough prison officers or keep them because we can't pay them enough. So we're paying fortunes in overtime because we can't staff our prison in Concord. So we have an old folks system or for programs for older people that are deeply in need of funding. We have a foster care system in need of funding. We have needs for major funding everywhere. And despite this, we refuse to introduce any additional sources of revenue. And we find $30 million to give back to people so that we can keep electing the same people who keep on sweating the same asset. It just doesn't make an awful lot of sense at all. And the city of Manchester, as the Queen City of the state, we should be the pride and joy of the state of New Hampshire and should be leading the way. And I am convinced, and why I do what I do here is I am still convinced that the good people of Manchester, were they to fully, if the situation were explained to them and they understood where we were, I think they would concur and say we need to stop this and we need to fix this. Situation, and we've seen that happen in other places. And I spent some time this year looking at the meetings, the town hall meetings and other local government meetings across the state of New Hampshire. Now, I didn't in any sense see all of them, but I paid attention to them as they were reported. And what I saw was, it really surprised me, in very, sensible, down-to-earth, everyday common sense people sitting in a room making decisions in small towns around the state of New Hampshire. People who value a penny, know what a dollar is worth, who are not going to be bamboozled by politic, speak, or by think tanks from Washington D.C. These people made decisions, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's not as though every warrant article was approved, because it wasn't, and there were towns around the state where people said, "We won't buy the new fire truck this year. I think we should wait one more year." But there was town after town after town where contracts were approved, where the addition of an extra teacher was approved, where some program for the middle schoolers was approved, and I saw there politics in action, where people could see the value of what they were getting. As I said, lots of these rural towns where people know exactly the situation that's going on. And when you looked at the percentage increases that they were I don't know if they were happy to, but they allowed to happen. And I saw increases of 3% and 4% back and forth across the area. And here are we in Manchester, the largest city in the state with the greatest needs in the state, and we have voters who, like my friend Roland, who called today, who was annoyed because we had a 1.06 or whatever it was increase in taxes this year, not even keeping just about or just under what the rolling average for inflation was over the previous 3 years. So despite the fact that stuff has gone up and other costs don't go up perfectly in line with that number, he still feels that there are a bunch of spendthrift aldermen. So that's the challenge that we have, is to explain to people that, the 2.8% increase that was passed in the city of Nashua, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know if it's the right number or not, because I haven't done the math for Nashua. Maybe it should have been 1.4. Maybe it should have been 4.8. I really don't know. I don't claim to know. All I know is that for the umpteenth year, when we do a comparative analysis across Nashua, Portsmouth, Concord, Rochester, and other comparable towns, and we see Manchester stuck in the mud on refusing to move a dime, and we're borrowing money from Peter and Paul in order to keep our city above water, and yet we have taxpayers feeling that somehow that there's a load of spending going on. I mentioned on my show a few weeks ago, in the city of Manchester, the cost of paving roads is $6 million per year. That's the cost of maintenance out over time, as I understand it, and we funded $4 million. We know that we're adding $2 million, in a deficit of $2 million, that we're going to have to find the money for that sometime in the future, our children, our grandchildren, or whatever. And it's going to cost us more, because if we don't look after it today, then it costs more tomorrow. But we're fine with that. I can't understand how people who claim to be fiscal conservatives, who hide behind that when they want to when they have no problem with us having the largest number of kids per class of any town in the state, they will claim, well, we can't afford more and we're spending money we don't have and all that stuff. But you'll vote for Ted Gatsas, who will propose and pass and oversee the bonding of money, borrowing money from on the bond market to pave roads in the city. But that's okay. That's like holding the line. Oh, that's right, because he's going to hold the line on your taxes. They're not going to go up a penny. Vote for me and I'll keep your taxes. I won't touch your taxes. It makes no sense, ladies and gentlemen. It's irresponsible. We have a state that wants to. I thought it was like a scene out of The Simpsons or something, or out of some wacko comic book, when you see a bunch of politicians in Concord a few weeks ago discussing how to pay for all-day kindergarten in the state of New Hampshire. So they agreed that it was important, and it would be important to lift people out of poverty and to help them to do better at school, and that in the end lifts people out of poverty. And then they look around and say, so what are we going to do? And the answer is they came up with Keno gambling. It's just. What else might they have come up with? I don't know. Some toll road at Lake Winnipesaukee to stop people getting into the lake or something. I couldn't tell you. Whatever nonsense they come up with. But we've decided that we're going to use gambling revenue that we don't know what it's going to be yet to fund all-day kindergarten, simply because we refuse to turn around and fund our state properly and actually decide what it is we want, what our priorities are, decide what we need to spend money on, and then raise the revenue that we need in order to do those things. And then dispense with the things. If we don't need stuff, then let's just dispense with them and just not do them. But if we do need them, why wouldn't we do it? But as I pointed out to somebody in a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about the opioid crisis, and in the face of the opioid crisis in the state of New Hampshire, and I don't want to get into emotional topics with people and make any false comparisons, but I think it tells a lot that in the state of New Hampshire, where we were losing whatever it was, one person and more than a person a week a couple of years ago, these are people actually dying. And in the face of losing people, we have Maggie Hassan, the governor, set up a task force to discuss the thing and to come up with solutions. And, in that case, Lou D'Alessandro and Dave Booton, one Republican and one Democrat, I spoke to them as that committee was starting its work. I think it was 26 people on it or something. And at the very outset, everybody was told that everybody knew that you can discuss whatever you want, just so you know, as you start on this 6-month long, let's see what we as a state will do for the opioid crisis. But just be very aware, there's no money there, so we're not going to spend a penny. So the first answer is, we're not going to spend a penny. Now go off and decide how to solve the problem. So we talked about, rightfully so, we talked about some legislative changes. We talked about looking more closely at how doctors prescribed opiate drugs, all of which might be commendable and all the rest of it. But there was no money for a program, for a recidivism program in prisons, for programs in our prisons that would allow people to overcome the opiate crisis. No money for beds. No people employed in the community to go out and help. No such program. As I understand it, there is a program in Sullivan County which is very successful at addressing the opiate crisis, and at I think they said 20% of people coming out of that program, which is run in Sullivan County through the prison service or the Department of Corrections. I think I read that 20% of people are recidivist. So 20% of people go back. For 80% of the people, it's successful. It's one of the most successful programs in the country, and yet we don't have that in any other county in the state because we refuse to fund it. And we don't, even Hillsborough County, that had the money in its coffers, the money was sitting in the bank, and they refused to put money towards the opiate crisis in Hillsborough County to pay for a drug court in Manchester. So I bring all of that up on Education Matters to point out that if we had a program, we know that there are children failing in Manchester because we're not giving them that which they need. We know for sure that we shouldn't be doing to children, we shouldn't be warehousing children the way we are. We know that it's damaging to kids, especially the least amongst us, the ones who need our help the most. We know that it's damaging to them to have 32 kids in a math class, and we insist on doing it. So we know we're damaging kids. I use the direct line, the analogy with, we knew in the opioid crisis that we had children dying. We couldn't get our legislators, the ones who don't want to spend a dime, to put their hands in their pockets or to turn to the taxpayers and say, we need to raise 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever the number is, in order to open 3 new centres in the state and employ some qualified people in drug treatment and management. We couldn't hire one, we couldn't spend one, we couldn't spend a dime. What hope do we have in education to have that same group of people recognise that we're damaging children and not doing the right thing by them, and say, we'll actually put our hands in our pockets, we'll explain to people why we need to do the right thing there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the 2 gentlemen who called in. Thank you for your calls. As ever, I think it's important that we exchange views. I am here to listen, and I do hear you. I thank you. I hope you have a great week. Enjoy the fine weather, and I'll see you again next Tuesday. Thanks and good night.